Okay, good morning, Dr. Peterson. There is as you have read my email, I'm Eun-Jeung Lee, PhD student at the Institute of Korean Studies at Freie Universität Berlin. It's a great pleasure to finally meet you, and thank you very much for taking your time to join this interview today. Before we begin, I'd like to address a few administrative matters briefly. This interview is part of the research project organized by the Korea European Center at FU, funded by Korea Development Institute, KDI, in South Korea. As a part of this project, we are conducting a series of expert interviews with scholars across Europe. The interview will be recorded and your permission, and it may be shared on our center's official YouTube channel later. So I would like to also briefly introduce the background of our research. Over the past few years, our team has conducted quantitative research on how Korea is perceived across the European countries. However, this year we decided to shift toward the qualitative research, focusing on in-depth interviews with leading experts in Europe. And we wanted to go beyond the statistical trend to better understand the narrative, experience, and meaning that shape how Korea is represented and understood across the various cultural and political contexts. So our current theme and focus on public perceptions of Korea in Europe, especially how these perceptions have evolved over the time in relation to Korea's cultural presence, political development, and academic representation. In this sense, we are truly honored to speak with you, Mr. Peterson, today as an expert on South Korea in Denmark. And personally, I'm excited to hear about you, how you first became interested in studying and researching and exhibiting Korea in Denmark. Could you tell us a little bit about how you first became interested in researching about Korea?
Yes, so my contact to and work on Korea, I think we have to go back to 1993 to sort of trace the beginnings of my interest in and what would turn out to be my work on Korea. Since after high school, I was an exchange student for a year in an international youth cultural organization. So I was spending a year in Korea as part of a YMCA program. So this was at a time where Korea was, whether north or south, was not really much talked about or covered in the Danish media. There were a few narratives at that time in the early 90s related with North Korea and sort of the geopolitical question, and some information about the unification church, about the democratization movement, and of course also since we have adoptees from Korea living in Denmark, we could also say that was sort of part of the discourse on Korea in a broader term, but it was very scant information at that time. So I must say, for me to go to Korea was going into a place that I was highly unfamiliar with, based on my sort of what I saw in the media and what I could find in the local libraries. I found a record on Pansori in the library, music library. That was about what I could find, right? So after being 1 year in Korea, I decided that I would like to pursue a career in the field of East Asia. Actually, I started at university in China studies, because I had the impression that Korean studies was a bit a risky career move to do Korean studies. But after having studied China studies, which is a bit more well established in University of Copenhagen, for a year, from 95 to 96, I decided to give it a chance with Korean studies. So I did a BA and MA in Korean studies, and after that I did my PhD, not directly within the field of Korean studies, but in museum studies, but with a topic that was covering the Korean collections in the National Museum of Denmark. And from there, I was 4 years, I was assistant professor in Korean studies at University of Copenhagen. And after that, and until today, I have been a senior researcher and curator at the National Museum of Denmark. So in this capacity, I cover East Asia, but my main focus, I would say, is Korea, but I also work on projects related to Japan and China, but I still kind of keep my main focus on Korean studies, I would say.
That's very fascinating. It's always inspiring to hear how personal curiosity or a personal just random chance turns into a long-term academic path or related Korea studies. And probably like after coming back from Korea and like your PhD, maybe like you might be already teaching the students and exhibiting about Korean culture, pop culture, as I have read. And were there any particular experience, collaboration, and like turning points that help you build your expertise in Korean studies?
So,
For example, like yes.
so sorry, you asked for what? Sorry, what points did you ask for?
Like yeah, like I guess like no, I guess it's better to say that like you continue to study related to Korea, also like East Asia, then and so maybe like it's better to ask like given your extensive experience of teaching and also observing and also exhibiting related to Korea, then I would like to hear more your perspective on how the general public in Denmark perceived Korea today, but like compared to earlier when you started the study about
Yeah.
Korea, 1990s, and what
So
has been changed there? Yeah.
and let's start out just making the very very broad observation that there has been a very significant change in how Korea is being sort of understood by the general public in Denmark. And I think it's a quite dramatic change. And I think that this change is also probably quite well represented in most other European countries, if not globally, of course. So I think that some of those tendencies that you can also see in other countries are also quite well represented in Denmark in terms of, in particular, of course, we have what can broadly be termed the Hallyu, which of course includes music, film, TV, drama, fashion, cosmetics, and so forth. And I think that definitely one of the major changes in students choosing to do Korean studies and the interest of the Danish public has turned towards popular culture. So and while so we I think we are sort of, you can identify kind of two tracks within this interest. As of course there is a small, very highly dedicated group of mainly young female fans of popular culture, especially the music and the TV dramas. But beyond that, there is of course also a more mainstream interest in Korean popular culture. And I think especially the last 5 years, perhaps, I would say that more than the music, maybe in particular the film and TV dramas has been main drivers in mainstreaming the interest in Korea through fictional storytelling in TV dramas and films, not least driven by platforms, media platforms like Netflix and so forth. As well as, of course, beyond that, also there is, I think also there is another thing we can observe, which is that there has been also a quite significant number of Korean restaurants opening in Denmark the last few years. And there has been, like, since the 1990s, there has always been a few restaurants in Korean restaurants in Denmark. But now we have sort of a chain, Seoul Barbecue, which has, I think it last month, maybe the fifth restaurant, like a chain in Copenhagen and sort of surroundings of Copenhagen is opening up it's a new venue at the same time as there is like finer cuisine restaurants, finer cuisine, as well as restaurants which is more catering to young people before they go out for a party. They can have sort of more how can you say, party food, which is sort of speaking to that kind of audience. So there is also, when you look at the cuisine, the food scene, there is a diversification of what Korean food means, just as I think also we can talk about a diversification of what popular culture means. It is no longer simply reduced to Gangnam Style and Psy, which was sort of one of the very few main reference for a lot of the sort of mainstream Danish audience. It has also become much more diversified. So I must say, when I have conversations with Danish people who are not specifically having an interest or professional relation to Korea, I think that this kind of diversification, and there is a broader repertoire of topics that a lot of Danish people are able to engage in when it comes to Korea. If we go beyond the culture and the popular culture, of course, also we should mention still the geopolitical situation between North Korea and South Korea, North Korea and the world. And I think that somehow, I don't think we can talk about an intensification. This has not become the coverage on the geopolitical aspect. This is not something I have been working on professionally. My main field is popular culture, so of course you have to take it a bit more loosely. What I'm going to say now, but my impression from the media coverage is that the focus on geopolitical issues, political issues, has been more steady. I cannot identify sort of an intensification of issues, and I think actually North Korea these days seems to be often covered in the context of relations to Russia, in the context of the Ukraine conflict, and so forth. So I don't see the same tendency when we are talking about geopolitics and politics. And then, of course, also there is the coverage of the political situation in Korea. And I mean, like the presidential crisis and the impeachment process, it was definitely covered by the Danish media. But again, it was never sort of a very strong story. So you can definitely, as an interested reader, you can definitely find the news. But I would say this is not something that has been sort of going very much to the headlines of the coverage. But it definitely also something that you can, as a Dane, can follow in the media, and something which is like a little bit beyond the trends. There has through the years been a few Danish journalists who have been based in Korea, and I mean, since the coverage of Korea is a bit, you don't have a lot of Danish journalists specializing on Korea. This, of course, matters. And the last few years, there has been a journalist who has been both writing for newspapers and covering stories in radio broadcast and TV broadcast. So sometimes also considering Denmark is a relatively small country compared, for example, to Germany, sometimes a singular journalist can actually make a difference in the selection of stories in Denmark. In 2 years, we have had a journalist who has been quite active in covering political, social, popular culture aspects of Korea across various media outlets in Denmark. Sorry. As for myself, when I was at the University of Copenhagen, often I would be contacted by journalists regarding the political situation and the geopolitical situation. But when I shifted to the National Museum of Denmark, probably because journalists will sort of, somebody working in a university and somebody working within a museum, I think there is some sort of probably
prejudice.
Yeah, maybe, or just a conception that maybe people working in a museum are maybe more in working in the cultural field, which is not completely wrong. So the last 2 years, I get journalists mainly contact me about stories related with popular culture. And for example, it could be a critical perspective of popular culture. For example, if there is a star who committed suicide, or if there are some stories about sort of imbalances in the various agencies, how they are running the agencies in terms of the talents and the performance and so forth. So it is often related to popular culture, or for example, stories about how cosmetics and how concepts of beauty in Korea is starting to become present in the Danish cosmetic markets, and whether this sort of not only the cosmetics but also beauty ideals, whether there is some transference with the cosmetics to Denmark. So I once in a while I get contacts from the Danish media who are interested in those kinds of stories. So it's not only like covering new TV series or films, but it's also looking at structural issues related to Korea.
Yeah, this is like very fascinating because like we are here now like in 2026, maybe like when it comes to like interest to Korea from Denmark side, maybe now it seems pretty much quite stronger as because Korea is far distance from Denmark, and Denmark is, as you described, like it's relatively smaller country, like cannot cover all the media coverage about East Asia, but like how Korea is like quite particular interest, even as you say, like specialized journalists are there. But like let's say like when you think about if there was any transitional period, you can even feel that Denmark or the Danish people start interest in Korea. When was this kind of transition, and or what kind of event or what kind of like some kind of experience you could have perceived?
It's of course difficult to pinpoint it very exactly, but definitely when I was teaching in my first year at teaching as assistant professor in Korean studies, which was around 2010, 9-10, already there, I could see that when I was sort of asking the students what were their motivation to have chosen Korean studies, most of the students by then quoted that they had come to know about Korea through popular culture. And when I was a student myself, and also when I was a PhD student, it was a slightly more mixed motivations, reasons that people would quote. There had been like martial arts, or there were adoptees who sort of quoted their relation to Korea through adoption, and there was also maybe some back in the day from the Unification Church who gained their interest in Korea that way. But when we came to around 2010, there seemed to have been a shift in motivations by students, and I think that this, of course, is to a large extent also showing sort of the change in the media coverage of Korea, as well as the general changes in how Korea was seen from Denmark. But of course, also, I think I should add that now I was mainly talking about the Danish media coverage. But of course, when you look at these young people, most of them did not really get to know about Korea through the Danish newspapers and the Danish media coverage. It was much more through websites and social media and so forth. So I think also that we also have to consider very much the role of social media, and the globalization of media consumption was definitely, I think, is a larger aspect of this trend than specifically the Danish media. Maybe the traditional Danish press, newspapers and TV was sort of following behind, and to a certain extent, I think still when I get contacts from Danish journalists, many of them are still trailing behind the trends on social media and in other sites than they are sort of actively forming the interest in Korea. They are more trailing behind somehow and trying to cover it and distribute it to a broader audience, of course.
So like per se, maybe like the Danish people's interest in Korea has developed, escalated generally over the public. Then maybe like the Danish media coverage start more interest in discover about Korea related issues. This is
I think so. Yeah, that would be my observation. So there is this very interesting interaction between a smaller group of people who are fans or very active consumers on Korea, and or consumers that could also be within food, cosmetics, music, and so forth. Broadly, we could maybe just choose to use a very broad term, K culture or Hallyu, whatever you would prefer, which term you would prefer. And I think that there is this very interesting interaction between the mainstream Danish media and these fans or gatekeepers or active consumers that is sort of definitely part of the development.
Okay, like let's say like in your observation, like for example, like if we divide like many different fields of related to Korea, like in which area are perception mostly positive or negative? Like it's black and white question, like a little bit like but
It's a
politics,
difficult question.
culture.
This is not an easy question. Yeah, it's not an easy
Yeah, like
question
economy,
yeah.
and then also like this is like something you cannot actually represent all the Danish people. Like,
No,
but
no, no.
I expect we expect it's just something by your observation, like
I
which.
think that there is. I mean, when it comes to the popular culture, I think definitely that there seem to have. I mean, I interviewed Danish fans of K-pop and sort of back in 2014 to 16, and at that time, many of these fans, I think they felt that they were met with some misunderstandings or prejudice by their peers, by their friends who are not interested in Korean popular culture, who just to give you one example, who maybe had a difficulty understanding the masculinity, the kind of masculinities of the K-pop performers, who were sort of looking at this from a sort of alienated perspective. And maybe there are still some prejudice around in Danish society today, but I think that there has definitely become a much more acceptant attitude towards the music and the popular culture. And I think when we look at the films and the TV dramas, I think that there is overall a quite positive reception of that aspect of culture. And when it comes for the understanding of Korea as a nation, I mean, that's of course somewhat dissimilar, but somehow closely interlinked to this. I think that the general perception of South Korea today is that it is a strong democratic country, and it is seen as an ally and as one of the nations in East Asia that is that Danish people generally can identify themselves with. Of course, there are sometimes coverage of corruption or political scandals or democratic noise or whatever we should term it as. And of course, that goes into the understanding of South Korean politics. But I would say still, even so, I think there is a generally positive understanding of Korea as a very progressive nation, which is, of course, maybe struggling with some structural imbalances. But I think that the main Danish observer, it is very difficult to say something like that, but I think there is generally speaking, there is a positive understanding of South Korea in the Danish public. But I must also say that still I encounter people who are confused about South Korea and North Korea, even till today. There are still, this is not uncommon, that if I talk about Korea and if I forget to declare that I'm talking about South Korea or North Korea, and even though I'm talking something which to me is very obviously and clearly can only be about South Korea, still I sometimes encounter, and it's just, you could say this is a reminder to myself that I should never, when I talk to people, I should never forget to say South Korea or North Korea, because still this can be quite confusing to part of the general audience. And I think it's fair enough, just because I have been traveling to Korea since 1993. How can I expect everybody to know the difference between South Korea and North Korea? So, I mean, still, maybe for some people there is some confusion about about the Korean peninsula even till today.
Yeah,
And
this also, yeah. Yeah, so like as far as I understood, so like the popular culture related to Korea in Denmark, probably, so all the era of the 2010, maybe there was the period that you can find like transition, like people start more interested, but like those are the people
yes,
who are especially interested in K-pop or Korean culture and Hallyu, and that's why
yeah,
like some of the Danish people recognize these minority people, they particularly interested in this
yes,
somehow quirky culture, and then but now like because of the maybe development of technology or platform, just more the public people in Danish, they can get used to be exposed to the Korean culture like in a
yeah,
popular way, right? And also like Korea related issues, maybe like earlier it was more about Korea and South Korea and international politics, but more detail about Korean social problems even would be discovered in the Danish media, right?
yeah. And to give you one example, like I think there is sort of a broad recognition that Korea
Mm,
has progressed in terms of economics, politics, and
mm,
in all fields has dramatically
mm,
progressed as a nation. I
mm,
think that would probably, if I did a general survey, that would be my
mm,
clear hypothesis, that there would be this sort of understanding of a nation that has been in steady progress, even though there are sometimes some
mm,
dramatic stories that kind of go
mm,
against this sort
mm,
of the narrative. I think that most likely that the general impression of most people would be this sort of steady progress. But at the same time, also, I think that there are quite many people who will then have still some
mhm,
doubts about what are the consequences of this steady progress. And
mm,
let me give you one example. Quite frequently, if I tell people that I work on South Korea, I sometimes encounter people who are very interested in the school system, because
mhm,
there has been some documentaries in Danish television and some coverage about
mm,
how young people have almost like I meet people who have this impression that young
mm,
Korean people, they have no free time until they enter
mm,
university, and that high school
mm,
is this very hard life where they are studying until late at night. So
mm, mm,
this is kind of a narrative I is kind of stuck with
mm,
many people, that at the same time that there is this definitely recognized progress,
mm,
there are also
mm,
this kind of a little bit understanding that maybe this dramatic progress, when we compare it to Denmark, which has been a much more steady, slow development by comparison, that there are some consequences. And one of the fields where these consequences maybe often are seen among the Danish audience could be about what does it mean to be a child, to be a young person, what kind
mm,
of life is there for the young people in the country. I think that is
mm,
one aspect, and maybe this is not something that many Danish
mm,
people will be aware of, but just to say that there is kind of a counterflow. We have had
mhm,
the founder of Oh My News, Mr.
mm,
O. He has been traveling to Denmark for
mhm,
more than a decade, where he has been showing an interest in the Danish public school system and in the
mm,
lifelong learning school system. So I don't think this, I would
mm,
not say that this is a main media trend, but there has been a few articles, coverage of how in Korea there is an interest in the school system of Denmark. I think it would be an exaggeration
mm,
to say that this is a major trend, but I think that this goes into this uh, uh, um, this narrative about the school system, that in
mm.
Korea there is some interest in finding inspiration from the Danish welfare state when it comes to the school system.
Mm, definitely, yeah. I'm pretty sure, as far as I remember, in the middle of the like 2010, there was like kind of hyped culture cultural interest about Scandinavian countries like
Yes,
life and working balances,
yes,
and like
and
that's why
the
even
happiness index and
yes,
so forth, and
yeah,
it's still there, but it's, I think it has become less strong, right? The focus, but
mhm,
it is it has not completely vanished. It has not completely disappeared. It is still there. But yeah, it was stronger some years back, and also I would encounter some Korean young people who came on a working visa to Denmark. Whenever most of those I got the chance to talk with quoted the welfare system, the happiness index, and the school system as sort of what motivated them to choose to come to Denmark for a working visa.
That part I want to listen a little more about, like Korean maybe migrant community maybe later a little bit, but like could you describe a little bit more about your exhibition you organized in your museum? How did you start, and what kind of fund did you get, and yeah, like how did it end as well? Yeah.
So since I came to the museum, I have been working on different projects related to Korea. Not all of them turned into exhibitions. Some of them also turned into book publications and events and so forth. But I did one if just talking about exhibitions, I did an exhibition on we have a selection of a collection of genre paintings, Kumsokwa by Kisan from the 1890s. So I have done an exhibition where I was juxtaposing the image of Korea in the 1890s with images from Korea today. I did a book on North Korean comics that did not turn into an exhibition. I would have loved to make an exhibition on the topic, but unfortunately, I was not able to convince the museum to do an exhibition on that topic. Then I have been doing some research on Danish K-pop fans, and Hallyu. So I published a book about Danish K-pop Hallyu fandom, and in that context, the museum did various events, which were, I think, quite successful in not only attracting Danish K-pop fans, but also the general audience who was just curious about K-pop. And then the last few years, I have been working on two projects related with Korean popular culture. One on comics. So since 2019, I have been collaborating with a number of Korean comic artists. In I could say, broadly speaking, in two types of project. One project was inviting Korean comic artists to make storytelling about the Korean collections in the museum and about Denmark. And that is a project I did from 2019 to 21. And then the last few years, I did a project about doing sort of documentary illustrations about Seoul. So I have been collaborating with one Korean and two Danish comic artists about and illustrators about different topics about contemporary Korean society. And this is going to be a website which will it's almost ready to become published.
Wow.
So this will show how Danish artists and Korean artists, how they perceive Seoul. And we have of course chosen various topics. One of the main topics I have chosen is food culture. So I'm trying to introduce to the Danish audience, Korea through food and restaurants. And so not only working with illustrators, but I have also collaborated with three Korean studies scholars, two from Korea and one from Japan, who have been writing essays about Korean culture, but specifically focusing on Korean food. So this is my sort of newest attempt to present Korea to the Danish general audience, focusing on contemporary Korea through mainly through the topic of food, but as a way of sort of presenting broader issues of Korean culture.
Yes.
And this September, we are also having another exhibition. We have been collaborating with a Korean graphic designer called Eun-Jeung, who is making a VR experience, which is inspired by, we have in the National Museum of Denmark, we have a gallery, a Korea gallery, and the VR, there's going to be a VR experience, which is kind of storytelling inspired based upon our historical collection. And we have not published it yet. I can only talk about it in broader terms. But there's going to be a VR experience, and our ambition is that we would like to try to get the Danish general audience interested in Korean history, but we are using sort of the historical drama, like you can say that saguk is kind of there is some consumption of saguk in Denmark. For example, Kingdom, to give you one example, was quite popular in Denmark. So we are trying to experiment, saying if we make kind of storytelling that is sort of similar to how saguk is presenting history, can we do that as a way to attract a broader Danish audience, but not only to see fiction and saguk, but using that as a stepping stone for them to gain an interest in Korean history, which is then represented in our Korean gallery. So the last few years, I have been working with, you can say, visual storytelling from various perspectives. But the sort of, since I'm in the National Museum of Denmark, of course, my responsibility or my obligation, my privilege, whatever you would call it, is to try to find ways to communicate Korea to a broader Danish audience. And the last few years, my main focus has been sort of visual, graphic storytelling, but also including most recently this VR experience, which will open in September this year.
Wow, this is a very interesting, like, because even though we have a more, I guess, like in Germany, we have a more broader audiences like interested in Korean cultures, but like we don't have someone like you, such an expert, and like actually like collaborate with the Korean artists, like to generalize, like to popularize Korean history and stories like connected to the Danish audience or German audience. Like, it's very lacking here compared to, I guess, Denmark even. But when it comes to about like food and also like related to your earlier topic about the Korean migrant in Denmark.
Yes.
Let's say you said about like 2010, 1990s, there was not many restaurants. Now you find so many more Korean restaurants.
Yeah.
Maybe even groceries, maybe in some particular theme of Korean restaurants or cafes. That's what I studied this semester in Berlin as well. And so like, what do you think about like, first of all, like, are there more Koreans coming to Denmark and Copenhagen to live, like to live through this social welfare state? And also they open the Korean, who are the people who open the Korean restaurant? And probably there are much demand of the Korean foodscape. Then that's why the business itself is very successful, do you think?
I must say, I think it's better to say that I do not have. I would love to be able to answer that question, give you a clear answer to your question, and I think it's a very interesting question. But my impression is that there has not been an increase of Koreans living in Denmark due to the opening of these Korean restaurants. I think that some of the owners of these restaurants are Korean. Some are maybe Danish Korean couples, and there are also a few opened by Danes who have been sort of immersing themselves in Korean food. So I think it's a mix of various backgrounds, but it is I don't have the impression that it has meant that there has been a lot of Korean chefs coming to Copenhagen. But I have to be a bit vague, indistinct in my answer because I have not looked at it, but it's a very interesting question, and now I feel like finding out actually when you ask me the question. My impression is that it is not a dramatic change in how many Koreans are living in Copenhagen currently.
But like the number of restaurants has surged by the time as far as you observed?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
And then like, who are the consumers, for example, like maybe earlier compared to now, like more diversified, like Danish people go to the Korean restaurant, even though the elderly as well?
I think that I enjoy Korean food. I think I don't have to keep that secret. I don't think that's controversial. So quite often I go to Korean. Quite often I go to Korean restaurants, not as part of research, just because I enjoy the food. And my observation is that there is definitely most customers seems to be Danish, but also quite often I notice that there are guests from Korea or other Asian countries, so people who are speaking together not in Danish or in English, but speaking together in Korean or Chinese. Of course, since I'm just there as a consumer, I'm not interviewing people, so this is just based on my impression. But I think that there is definitely a mix of what I could call mainstream Danish guests to the restaurants, but also there are Asian visitors. But it is, of course, impossible for me to know whether this is tourists or people on a working visa or people living permanently in Denmark. I have no idea about that. But definitely most times I go to Korean restaurants, I can see that it is a mixed audience, I would call it.
What about like for example, like in Berlin now, is start to search of the number of the East Asian style grocery shopping centers is very like franchised in the, Berlin and Germany overall, and so like people go to the grocery, even those German people, normal German people, to buy some groceries from East Asia, particularly also Korea. Yes.
Same thing is happening in Denmark. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think there are any grocery stores specifically selling Korean food only, but definitely in I think most of the owners of these groceries, I have the impression, are Chinese. Whether they are mainland Chinese or not, I'm not certain. But in most of these groceries now, there will be a very good selection of Korean items as well. So it is my impression that the main groceries are sort of broadly East Asian, often mainly Chinese, but that the Korean food section is substantial and often quite good in many of these grocery stores.
What about like I was wondering also like if I had to encounter many different experts in different countries in Europe now, and for example, like you also worked for the Copenhagen University of the Korean Studies, and when you meet the students right now, like how is the number of students going on? Maybe in Berlin it has been quite surge. There was up to the certain point. Now is quite stabilized number of students in Korean studies.
There has been definitely the last maybe the last 8-10 years, there has been a quite high number of students who have applied for Korean studies. And I did not compare for last year, but I have been some of the previous years I compared. And for many years, there was a much lower number of students who wanted to do Korean studies than Japanese and Chinese studies. But Korean studies has definitely been catching up with Japanese and Chinese studies. I mean, it's not that we have to compare, but I think it is a good way of comparing. We can always discuss whether it is what does it mean to compare East Asia like that. So that's also part of a paradigm. So sorry, but I can see that there has been a steady increase in the number of students who want to conduct Korean studies. However, the number of students who are enrolled in the program is still lower than Chinese and Japanese studies, and also the faculty is still now there are. It has definitely from when I was assistant professor, it was a very small section Korean studies. Now there is two permanent professors in. And one professor in language and one permanent teacher, and I think at the moment there is one PhD student. So I think that it is a quite healthy study program in Korean studies, and doing much better than 10-15 years ago. but I think still that the number of students who are allowed into the program is much lower than the number of students who applies. But you could say that then it also means that those students who are accepted, of course, relatively speaking, have quite good grades because of course the enrollment is based on the grades of the students.
Okay, like then we are heading to the almost the end of the
Oh,
interview.
it's
Like
so fast.
I
Yeah.
want to like
Yeah.
I want to giving some more this public diplomacy related questions, like or want to gain some advice from your perspective. Maybe what are the main challenges or opportunities for Korea's image in Denmark we can develop in the near future?
I think maybe this is not exactly what you are thinking about, but something that I have been in my mind as we have been talking, and somehow I mean, is how do we see this in terms of Korea? But there has, for a number of years, there has been this discussion about adoptees in Denmark, and there has been also quite a lot of critical debate, and a lot of this critical debate comes from a generation of adoptees from Korea who has been questioning the relation between the Danish and the Korean nation state and the conditions under which they came to Denmark. So I think that this is one of the fields that I have not talked much about during this hour. That is definitely an issue I think is relevant to keep an eye on. And I mean this sort of the recognition of the responsibility not only on the Danish families, but more so the structural responsibility between Denmark and Korea in adoption. There has been quite a number of stories of adoptees who could not find out about their family background, and some of them have found out that maybe sometimes the parents, their biological parents in Korea, were not aware of the adoption situation, and some adoptees has found what they thought were their biological parents, but then it turned out it was not. And these kinds of stories, I mean, it has been an ongoing issue, but that's definitely one aspect of the relation between Denmark and Korea that has some critical aspects. So I don't know if it was exactly that you were asking me for, but I just think it's when we are talking about Denmark, I think this is definitely an issue which I think it would be a mistake if I did not bring that up as part of the broader picture of how is Korea perceived in Denmark. And I think that these years there are various topics also, as you may know, we have in Denmark, we have this issue with Greenland, which is very much on the forefront in Denmark. And of course, the focus is very much about US and Trump and the interest, the American interest in Greenland. But also, I don't think this is not the occasion to talk about that. But this interest from the US in Greenland, of course, also puts to the front what has been the relations between Denmark and Korea in a post-colonial perspective, and the responsibility of Denmark vis-a-vis citizens from Greenland. And I think also we have stories about Danish citizens growing up in how do you call that, børnehjem, like children's homes. So these years there are various kinds of stories about how the Danish nation state has been in this. We proud ourselves as a very strong social system, and I think for good reason. But there are also some critical stories about. Now I'm bringing together diverse aspects, but I think that this issue of Korean adoptees and the responsibility of the Danish nation could be seen as broader part of this post-colonial critical discourse. Yeah.
I guess like also the adaptive problem issues that have been dealt even since last year. I've seen many documentary TV shows in Korea start to invite these adoptees from different countries, particularly also from the Scandinavian countries, and that is very important moment also Korea right now to reconcile also promising apologizing from the past of government's mistakes as well. And okay, like let's finalize like the last question, like how could we, okay, academically or cultural cooperation we can expect like between Korea and Denmark? If you have any kind of like ideas we can do for further academically or cultural cooperation as an expert in even in this field of study.
When for academically speaking, I think I look definitely I look towards Korean studies at the University of Copenhagen, which I think now has Barbara Wall as a professor, and I think that in Barbara Wall there is a very dynamic professor who is constantly bringing scholarship scholars to Denmark to do lectures and presentations and working on various research projects. So I think that that's definitely one place to look for the development of academia. In the National Museum of Denmark, I think I have been very lucky and privileged that through the years I gained various support from Academy of Korean Studies, from Korea Foundation, from the National Museum of Korea Museum program. So I think there is, I must say that I think that there has been a very positive feedback and support from various cultural institutions to further academia within the museum. But I think that I would not state this is not sort of the main aspect I would like to emphasize. I think I would like to emphasize University of Copenhagen as the main drive for the academia. While I think when it comes for the cultural aspect, I must say that the support from various Korean institutions has definitely made it possible for me to work on Korea, because this is not something we can take for granted in a national museum, that Danish National Museum will support programs related to Korea. This has only been possible with the support from Korea. And as a third instance, I can also say that I can see that the Korean embassy in Copenhagen has been quite steadily been promoting Korean film and also other kinds of cultural festivals. And this is not just like a once in every 5 years. There has been very steadily being from the embassy a focus on promoting, not exclusively but mainly film, bringing it to film festivals. So I think that this is there is always already here. There is some sort of there is an infrastructure, there is a network, there is an interest. So I think that there is a potential to further develop the cultural scene through these actors, through these cinemas, to these interested parties, and to a quite broad, I think, Danish interest in what is going on the film scene in Korea.
So like definitely Korean government has been supporting a lot in the cultural sector to Denmark side. So it has been pretty much successful. The funding itself, probably, it sounds like it, right?
That's my impression. I mean, I can, of course, it's easier to talk on my own behalf. On my own behalf, I must say that a lot of the things I have been doing the last many years, it would not have been possible to do it on that scale and in that way without the support from the various foundations and so forth from Korea. Then it would have been something very different.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peterson. This has been a truly insightful conversation, and your perspective will be invaluable for our research. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.